We've got an incredible offer for you this Black Friday weekend. 25% off nearly everything in our Redmen merch store. The only thing it doesn't include is Christmas knitted jumpers, but it's 25% off absolutely everything else. Scan the QR code and it will be automatically added at checkout. If you just want to go to redmenmerch.com, at checkout you can type in the code REDMEN and that will take off 25%. That's redmenmerch.com, 25% off code REDMEN.
Well, there's a lot of that going on, isn't it? I mean, you mentioned obviously the potential impending takeover, the fact that Liverpool are certainly, essentially up for sale, certainly open for investment, whichever way you want to look at it, really. But yeah, you're right. Julian Ward's been at the club since 2012 in some sort of capacity. Obviously, takes over from Michael Edwards, and it's an interesting point in that it's such a pivotal role, the sporting director role, but especially at a football club like Liverpool and the way that we're run. And what sort of emerged on the back end of this story is that they might be looking at potentially changing the way they run. So, just quick, what has his role sort of entailed? What was expected of him? And not only that, what could be coming further down the line potentially then? Yeah,
well, I suppose we start with what he was doing. So, I mean, he's a great success story of Liverpool, really. If you look at it, Michael Edwards being one. He is definitely one in the sense of he was recruited as part of a bit of a restructure under FSG in the Brendan Rodgers era. Just at the start of it, they took three or four key members of staff from City's recruitment team. Two of them are still in place for now. We'll check our phone at the end of the show. Dave Fallows, the head of recruitment, Barry Hunter, the chief scout, Julian, massive protege really of Dave Fallows, worked with him at City, and he came along as well. He was originally a scouting manager for sort of Iberia, if you want to call it that, sort of Portugal, Spain. Worked under that, and then it was a new role was created essentially, and he took it on, the first person purely in charge of loan pathways and football partnerships, and I think it was underrated. Well, I say it's underrated. It's probably not the right way of putting it. It went under the radar how well he did in that role, because if you think about Liverpool, what the club was like, it was awful at selling players. It was awful at contingency plans, and young players would come and drift in and out and go out and be sold for buttons, and then years later you'd think, oh, did we make a mistake with that?
Sorry to interrupt, guys, but this show is sponsored by our friends at BetVictor, and here they are talking about a certain Jude Bellingham.
It was comparable to Wayne Rooney 2004 in terms of the level of a 19-year-old kid to control midfield. Even, look, let's be real, if we're being completely honest about it, he lost possession a couple of times in that first 30 minutes, a lot of pressure on him, but the way he recovers, the way he tackles, the way he goes in on players, and then obviously for the rest of the game, what he actually does on the ball, it was as good as Wayne Rooney in 2004. Obviously, as an England fan, I'm not hoping that it kind of blows out with that kind of metatarsal kind of, I hope the hype doesn't go to his head. But I honestly, if you just take a step back and look at what he did against a top 20 international side, Iran are a World Cup side with pedigree. They're not obviously going to win a World Cup, but they are
big garbage.
They've got a lot of pedigree. They've got a lot of pedigree. They've got a good coach, ex-Ferguson, assistant coach. They're a really tough side to beat. And we put 6 past them, and a large part of that is down to Jude Bellingham's control in midfield.
Hey, I hope you enjoyed that. Now, if you want to watch the full show, head over to the Last Fan Standing YouTube channel. The link is in the description, and just tell them that Redmen sent you there. Now, back to our show.
If you look at what they've done, a lot of the credit that they've had for things like getting great fees for players who aren't wanted, that comes down to that loan policy and that role at Jules and now David Woodfine take part in. You think of Rhian Brewster keeping his value high, Harry Wilson, Marco Grujic, Taiwo Awoniyi, countless others. You'll think of many others as we go on here. So when it came to the point where I think FSG was sort of, they must have had an inkling that Michael Edwards was, I wouldn't say wavering, but what are we going to do when he goes? That they obviously decided it was the best way was to create a contingency plan from within, and Jules was the ideal person to do that. I think what helped massively is, I think you need a figurehead and you need a person that sort of, in the media the same, we need this guy to pin everything on. But I think what was clear from speaking to people around Liverpool and speaking to Jules himself, it was always a much more collaborative effort. So Dave Fallows had a major part to play in certain things. Barry Hunter has a big part to play. Ian Graham has a big part to play in his research team. The scouts on the ground have, so it was never about one person, but you did need the guy to sort of I think they're basically the one to take it to the owners and say, look, are we going? Is it yes or no on this?
Absolutely. Yeah.
If it's yes, we're going to do it this way. If it's no, right, can we do this? And now the question is, what does that process look like? Is it the manager taking it? You know, the suggestions obviously in that regard, and it's an obvious suggestion to make. Really, is it now largely in the hands of the football staff? Will there be someone recruited from outside who doesn't have that way of working, or doesn't have that? What's the word? Sort of knowledge of the process with the club. Will it even be FSG doing the restructuring? And that's probably the biggest question of all. But what I would say is I think it's important to stress that what Liverpool have insisted for many years is that no one individual will define the structure. Maybe aside from Klopp, maybe that would be the only person that you would say, and I think they'd even deny that to a degree. But no one person. There's no sort of. It's not a Jenga tower where you take one out and it all falls apart. They believe there are the right people in place, but that was before we're starting to lose people. You know, you look at that's three key Jenga pieces to keep that analogy going, taken out in the space of a month.
Yeah, it's interesting times, isn't it? There's two ways of looking at it, really. You can look at the positive side of things, say, listen, they've always dealt with these sort of setbacks, if you like, and managed to get the right people in place. But then you look at the other side of it and you hear the reports coming out about potential sale, and all of a sudden key figures, like you say, start moving on. And just on Ward then, so you mentioned obviously Mike Gordon's influence and the fact that he's been kind of taken off, he's been sort of redeployed, if you like, into a new role. You clearly, well, he said himself that that's a big part of his rationale behind leaving. But do you think as well, moreover, the fact that the club is going through a little bit of uncertainty, do you think that's played a decision?
I think it has to. I mean, you couldn't. I mean, to be honest, my instinct would say, wouldn't you be more likely to stay with that in mind, because you're thinking, well, it could be an exciting time, or it could be a. I mean, he's leaving. His contract isn't up. He's leaving. He is contracted, so he's leaving of his own accord. Absolutely, listen, I don't have any inkling whatsoever that money really plays that big a part. But you would say that, well, listen, if you stay and people give you the payoff, that's obviously, you'd say that's more beneficial than walking away from a job. You'd always say that. Yeah. But I think it's also important. We never really. It's very easy, and we're doing a show on it, and it is the talking point is always the club and the club and the club, and what's going on within the club. Yeah. There's also individuals at play. Michael Edwards said, if you think about his leaving statement, he said, I've done 10 years and I've always believed that, change is important for growth and all these kind of things. It's important to remember Julian and Michael Edwards were very tight. They worked together an awful long time. So if one was feeling that, there's every chance the other was feeling that, and was experiencing all the same sort of feelings. He's got a young family. As I say, he's 41 years of age. He's not an old football. He's not been in the game for 30 years. Yeah. The way it was put to me is he's a quarter of his life's been spent at Liverpool. It's a lot of pressure. It's a lot of scrutiny. It's a lot of demands on your time and on your energy and on your mind. So it's important to factor all those things in. But I do also think at a wider angle, I think it's also one thing I think would be easy to say is there's a lot of uncertainty around the club, regardless of what happens, whether the club gets taken over or not. I think there's still a lot of uncertainty, and I think the job would be a difficult one to do. And in my opinion, in the current guys, it's getting more and more difficult. Yeah,
it certainly seems that way, doesn't it? It was a difficult job anyway, like I touched upon earlier, in the way we're run in terms of our sporting project or model, if you like. That is integral. Like, we all lauded Michael Edwards for the job he did for so many years, and as you rightfully say, with the aid of Julian Ward and others around him. But when Michael Edwards left, it was a case of will Ward be able to step up to the plate, if you like? And that's why it's come as such a surprise today, I think, for so many, because it's so soon after he took the role. Really, I think I don't really know the length of his contract, but I imagine it wasn't a year. You know what I mean?
3 years.
Yeah, exactly. So it's a really interesting one on that regard. Just on the Ingrain thing, obviously it comes literally hours later. Obviously, Director of Research, you mentioned him as sort of part of that team there. How sort of integral was he to all of that and his day-to-day role, and where could the club potentially go next in there?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. I mean, he's very much the analytics side of it and the research, Director of Research, obviously. I mean, I know how highly regarded he is in analytics communities.
Yeah.
I'm sure you'll see some of the reaction from prominent figures in there on social media, and his team, you know, it was described to me as it's sort of like, you know, NASA. It was the way it was described, you know, that sort of those type of knowledge and and you know, levels that they operate at, you know, the detail that they go into. You look at, it's always been the biggest challenge, I think, in football, and it's always been a bit of a misconception with Liverpool, I personally think, is that it's combining the eye test, if you want to call it that, with the numbers test, and you know, there'll always be the people. I mean, I always remember, the Michael Edwards sort of hit piece that was done years and years ago about being a laptop guru, and he doesn't watch a game, and he this and that, based on old school scouts, you know, sort of really seeing their work diluted or changed. Liverpool, I think, have done it better than a lot of clubs in terms of getting the balance right between buying on algorithms and numbers and analytics, and also building relationships with agents and building relationships with clubs and sporting directors, and also knowing what a good player is by watching them. But a key part of that is really the numbers are done to guide what they're looking for, or what the game model looks like in terms of what they're trying to do, what players seem to fit it, and then when they do find a player, okay, let's have a look at the underlying stuff, and you know, you look at some of the hits that they've had really off numbers. I mean, I think Mohamed Salah's the best possible example you can get of it. You know, a massive analytics sort of hit, and that's paid off handsomely. I think Sadio Mane falls into the same category. I'm pretty sure Diogo Jota was in that category. I wouldn't be at all amazed if Darwin Núñez and Luis Diaz were very much heavily on that curve. You sort of look at the team that Liverpool built. It was great. Well, it is a great team. Was a great team, certainly. It wasn't built on megastars. It wasn't built on players who everyone sort of said straight away, well, that's an obvious one. It was built an awful lot on players that you said, right, okay, yeah, good player. Will he go to the next level? And so many of them did. Andy Robertson, great example. Gini Wijnaldum, great example. Sadio Mane, even someone like Fabinho.
Even Fabinho,
you know, I mean, to be honest, I'd even say Virgil van Dijk would be one that you say he looked. When he signed, I think everyone thought he was going to be amazing.
75 million,
but he wasn't. You know, you look and say he never played sort of top level. He never played World Cup. He played a little bit in the Champions League and things like that. It was a gamble that Liverpool took, especially that money, and it paid off so handsomely. You know, so I think with all those pieces in place, I think that was what enabled it to happen. It wouldn't have worked if you just had a really, really good scout with a good eye for a player, or you had a really good connection in Portugal or Brazil or wherever. You needed all of those pieces in place, and of course you needed the manager that was going to mould it all together and be the final sort of piece of the jigsaw. Yeah,
that's it. And we've been, you don't use the word fortunate, but we've been, you know, very blessed to have all the right people in place at the same time. And now all of a sudden, like you alluded to earlier, it seems like a couple of kind of all walking away in one go.
I think as well, it does. It's sort of one of the things that, in all the debate around the owners, it's sort of, I think it sometimes gets lost a little bit, because things are said like, oh, if it wasn't for Klopp or it wasn't for Michael Edwards, where would the FSG be? But you have to remember that they put these people in the position, you know. So that is one of their successes, is that you know, we don't know everything, but we know someone who knows a lot more than anyone else. We'll put him in that right position. You know, we don't spend the most money, but we've got the manager who makes sure that we don't need to spend the most money, or the sporting director. So I think that is, you know, you can look at it both ways. You can say that's a negative towards FSG because they're not, you know, they're not willing to spend in a way that guarantees success. But it also, I think it shows a smartness on their part. And I think that is the bigger question. It leads to the obvious suggestion, doesn't it? In my opinion, is this the ship sort of emptying before everything changes? I think it's a fair comment to make, or a fair sort of thread to pull at. But it'll be interesting, definitely, to see, one, what the impact is in the short term. January is just around the corner.
That's exactly it.
You've got a few big decisions to come then and in the summer. How quickly does the investment / takeover story move on, if at all? And also, can FSG, if let's say they were still in place as majority owners come the start of next season, can their model carry on working without these key figures in key positions?
That's it, because that's one of the big talking points from today, really, as well. But also, when it was announced that Michael Edwards was leaving, it was, Michael Edwards was going to leave at the end of the season, but Julian Ward's coming. There's been none of that today. Is Julian Ward's going to leave, and we're not entirely sure, which obviously smacks of the fact that we don't know who the owner's going to be by that time, potentially. So there's no real contingency plan in place there. But as you rightly mentioned, Paul Joyce today for the Times wrote that Jurgen Klopp has taken a more hands-on approach to life at Liverpool, essentially, and recruitment and stuff like that over the last 12 months. And also that Liverpool are potentially looking to reconsider their sporting model, which is an interesting line. Where does that leave us, really?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose it's a couple of things it shows. One, I think it is an unexpected development for Liverpool. Julian, I think, is I don't think that was, the contingency with Michael Edwards was already in place for 10 months before he announced, or it emerged that he was going to leave. I think this has caught Liverpool a lot more on the hop in terms of, we thought we were just going to carry on as normal a little bit. So I understand why there isn't an assistant sporting director at the club at the moment. So that's quite obvious. But yeah, I think the fact that Liverpool have sort of even the sort of off the record steers that you've had from people around the club is that it's all up in the air a little bit, and everything's on the table in terms of it could be. I mean, I actually don't really know what different models there are really. There's not many clubs now that don't have a sporting director. There's not many clubs that don't have a sort of that pretty clear structure. I think if you looked around the Premier League and the top European clubs, you'd be able to find a pretty good tree of people in key positions. So I don't know what it looks like if you say you're going to a different model, whether it means someone from outside. But I mean, I was joking with someone today about, are we going back to the transfer committee? Surely we're not going back to those days and those conversations. Are we going to a manager-led policy where a bit of a Sir Alex Ferguson at Manchester United or an Arsene Wenger at Arsenal? And I mean, they're sort of two great examples and probably opposite sides of the coins if you look at the way it worked out for both of those clubs in certainly in the latter stages of those two managerial reigns. I think probably the most obvious conclusion to draw at the moment is probably that they're looking at maybe management led, and it's interesting because I think Jurgen knows a player, and I think Jurgen's got sway and pull. It's also interesting in the sense that that's a lot of responsibility for someone who's already got an awful lot on his shoulders.
Hey, hope you enjoyed watching that. If you want to see the rest of the video where I spoke to Neil about the possible transfers in January, as well as Liverpool's possible takeover, then do head to Redmen Plus, where you can find the thing in full.
Get closer to Liverpool Football Club and the magnificent city of Liverpool over on Redmen Plus, our Liverpool streaming service. Documentaries, features, more content from the Redmen studio, and you can learn deep and in-depth knowledge from experts, journalists, and cultural features going to get you close to the football club that we all love. Head to redmenplus.com.